Hello, everyone, and welcome to Seed 540. This week, we're going to be creating your classroom management plan. And in this presentation, we're going to be talking about all the various components that will go into your classroom management plan. So to begin with, you're going to be creating your own classroom management plan, and we need to do some thinking before doing. In this mini lesson, we will highlight the importance of establishing a comprehensive and well thought out classroom management plan that involves the following: a statement of purpose, the rules, the procedures, and a statement of the positive and negative consequences. There are 6 key principles for a classroom management plan that I want you to keep in mind as you are doing this activity. It's important that when you're coming up with a classroom management plan, you invest time at the front end, and we'll get to that here later on in the presentation. It's important to teach well with quality instruction. A classroom management plan is not a substitute for quality instruction. There should be a focus on positive behaviors that provide supports. We need to be educative, not vindictive, in our classroom management plans. And we need to be persistent and consistent when we implement our classroom management plan in our classrooms. So I'd like for you to imagine our new teacher. Her name is Miss G. And Miss G's first day of teaching is here, but she's worried about what to do if behavior problems arise. So we are going to be looking at first here a statement of purpose that will be part of Miss G's classroom management plan. To begin with, it's important to reflect upon the following. What does Miss G need to understand about student behavior? What has Miss G learned from the theories of development and motivation that can guide her thinking? So all those things that we've talked about here in this course as they relate to development and motivation, it's important to keep those in mind as we develop our classroom management plan. Also, what behavior is Miss G most concerned about? And how confident does Miss G feel about handling disruptive behavior? Each teacher has their own personal style, and as part of this process, it's important that Ms. G reflects upon her degree of directness, her emotionality, her degree of movement in the classroom, how active is she in the classroom, verbal turn taking, how competent does she feel in being able to manage turn taking in a discussion, expressions of consideration, attitudes towards personal space, and attitudes towards sharing. Reflect on your own experiences and the frame of reference in relation to your own upbringing and school experience. All of these things factor into your own personal teaching style, and that personal teaching style will be reflected in your classroom management plan. Additionally, what are your perceptions of authority figures and the perceptions of your students in the areas of who is deserving of respect, how do you show respect, and acknowledging cultural differences? This is key when we work with specific populations. I'm thinking in particular of Native American populations and how they show respect to their elders. It's very distinctive and very different from other populations within the United States. Ms. G learns that she must start with a statement of purpose, a brief, positive statement that reflects her personal teaching style and her attitudes about authority. It must also convey to parents and students the reasons why various aspects of the management plan are necessary. A statement of purpose has 4 criteria. It needs to be focused, it needs to be direct, and it needs to be clearly understood, and most importantly, free of teacher jargon. One of the things that teachers will commonly do is put their statement of purpose on their syllabus or any letters to the parents at the beginning of the year. So here we have Ms. G's sample statement of purpose. Our classroom will be a positive, considerate learning environment that fosters academic excellence and respect for others. All students will strive to do their best, both academically and behaviorally, to promote the success of everyone in the classroom. Now let's take a moment to compare that with this particular statement of purpose. What's wrong with this statement of purpose? Thinking back to those 4 criteria. In our classroom, we have high expectations for our students, all of whom are valued learners and productive thinkers. We recognize individual differences and respect cultural diversity. We are committed to enhancing student achievement and to helping students develop an internal locus of control and self-determined behavior, to providing a safe and nurturing instructional environment, to working with parents as partners in the education of all children, and to engaging children in cooperative problem solving. So as you look through that, clearly we have an issue of jargon. We have an issue of not being very precise and concise. And we want to make sure that it's kind of punchy and that it's conveying what your attitudes really are when it comes to your classroom management plan. All right, so moving on here. Ms. G thinks about her expectations for her students, the behaviors she wants them to display in her classroom. From these, she will develop a set of classroom rules. So this is our next step in creating our classroom management plan. We're going to be focusing on the rules that you're going to develop. Classroom rules reflect the classroom behavioral expectations. Think about your own classroom rules that you're hoping to convey. Do they meet these described criteria? Are they stated positively? Are they simple, specific terms? Are they measurable and observable? And do they convey the expected behavior? So that the expectation should always be reflected in the rules that you have in your classroom. So here are Ms. G's rules and expectations. You'll see it over here in the little yellow box. Are the rules aligned with her expectations? Do they follow the school rules and department guidelines? Do they cover the behaviors she wants addressed? So again, these go back to what she really wants in her classroom, and they have to be aligned with her statement of purpose. One of the things that I'd like to mention here is that we don't talk about school rules or department guidelines right now because we don't know what they are in your particular situation, but it's important when you're developing your rules that you're taking those school rules and department guidelines into consideration. The other thing I'd like to mention here is that you need to consider how you are going to model the rules in your classroom. It's one thing to say, for example, to speak respectfully and use an inside voice, but what does it mean to speak respectfully? I think it's important for every teacher to know how this really plays out in the classroom and model it to the students. When it comes to rules, here are some things to consider. Many new secondary teachers are tempted to have their classrooms create a set of classroom rules. That sounds very democratic, of course, but be forewarned. You will most likely have multiple classes. It's not feasible to create a set of rules for each class. And that act of moderating a negotiated conversation with an entire class implies that a teacher already has a basic set of classroom management skills. But that's not to say that you can't develop mini rules or situational rules based on the dynamics of a particular class. So for example, let's pretend that you're going to be running a Socratic seminar in your class. Maybe that particular class comes up with a set of rules in that particular situation. The next thing we're going to be looking at is procedures. Procedures describe the steps required for students to successfully complete daily routines and less frequent activities. So here are some considerations for developing effective procedures. We have here the who, what, where, when, why, and hows. Why is the procedure needed? Where is the procedure needed? What does the procedure entail? Who will use the procedure? When is the procedure needed, and how should the procedure be implemented? So example, here we have just a few over here in the pink box here. How do you hand in assignments? How do you enter into a classroom? How do you engage in classroom discussions? What are your procedures around that? Sounds really kind of self-explanatory, but how do you use the bathroom? There needs to be a procedure around that. How do you leave the room? And then transitioning between activities during the class. So again, here are some things to consider when it comes to procedures. Procedures can be very dependent upon the actual physical space of the classroom and the environment. You may not know this ahead of time, and it's hard sometimes to develop procedures without knowing what exactly your physical space looks like. There may also already be procedures in place set by your department. Be sure to ask about this ahead of time. All right, so we talked about the statement of purpose, we've talked about rules, we've talked about procedures. Now we're going to move on to positive and negative consequences. Consequences, both positive and negative, are thought out ahead of time, and that is key. You need to think them out ahead of time. You can't just come up with them on the spot. Consequences should always be educational and focused on development. They should be developmentally appropriate for your students. Your own consequences meet these criteria. So as you come up with consequences, are they clear and specific? Do they relate directly to the rules and procedures? Are they responsive to a range of intensity or hierarchy of alternatives? And by that, do we mean, do you have like a warning system? Do you have something that kind of ramps up in terms of severity when you're for your consequences? Are they natural and logical for the school's environment? And do they conform with existing school rules? It's difficult to come up with consequences when they run in direct counter influence to what's going on in the school. You want to make sure that you're not doing something that is oppositional to to some of the school rules. Positive consequence or reinforcement is a means by which teachers can increase the probability that a behavior will occur again in the future. And I like to call these a keep doing it consequence. Here's some characteristics of reinforcers. They're tangible, they can be social, and they can be an activity. So for tangible reinforcers, stickers or tokens or anything that you can give a student. Piece of candy, sometimes that happens. Social, a smile, a simple praise, a public praise. Public praise is always much more meaningful for students than a private praise. An activity, extra social time. Maybe you have a reinforcer by way of having the students watch a movie at the end of the unit. So yes, secondary students still love the things that we may consider too childish. There was one time in an 8th grade classroom that I gave out stickers, and you thought that I would have given them the world. It was just the most amazing thing when I handed out a sticker. Don't discount those things. Students really like those tangible things, but again, they also like the social reinforcers and the activity reinforcers. Conversely, negative consequences are the means by which teachers can decrease the probability that a behavior will occur in the future. And again, this is what I call a stop doing it consequence. When thinking about negative consequences, it's important to keep these things in mind. Are they considered unpleasant by students? Are they applied in an educative rather than a vindictive fashion? So that's important to keep in mind. You never want to have it be a knee-jerk kind of reaction. Are they administered calmly and consistently? Are they applied along with positive consequences? So you always want to make sure that your ratio of positive to negative consequences is really not out of whack. Are they logical for the desired behavior? So it must be whatever infraction, it must be reflected in the rules and vice versa. So for example, there was a student that I had who complained to me and said that there was a teacher that when he was talking in class, the consequence was that he needed to write an essay on the number of telephones in the United States in the 1830s. So clearly that was not logical to the infraction. Is it applied immediately after the behavior occurs? And most importantly, and I cannot stress this enough, is it considerate of the student's dignity? You never really want to have that shame and blame. You want to make sure that the student understands that they broke or went against a particular rule in your class, and you want to make sure that the student understands that and that they understand the consequence, but all the while preserving their dignity. So one of the things that I see with teachers quite a bit is that they don't know how to deliver negative consequences, and that can be a challenge for new teachers. So here are some tips. Make sure that you apply them consistently. Make sure that if the negative consequence is going towards student A, that if student B does the exact same thing, that negative consequence is consistently applied. Use the power of proximity. And by that, we mean you don't want to be shouting across a classroom, delivering a negative consequence. You want to be close to the student, giving them that respect, conveying, in that power of proximity space, what exactly they did and what are the consequences. You want to make sure, and along the same lines, you want to make sure you have direct eye contact with the student, that you use a soft voice, and that it's anger-free, yet firm. Link the consequences to the expected behavior, so to make sure that the student understands not only what they did wrong, but what they need to do right. And never accept excuses, bargaining, or whining. It is what it is. This is the consequence. All right, so we've had now these 4 things. We're ready to develop Ms. G's classroom management plan. There are 2 sides to an effective classroom management plan. It takes 2 to tango. You have the teacher's behavior and you have the student's behavior. Teacher's behavior. Okay, so Ms. G reflects upon her own practice and how it might be influencing student behaviors in her own classroom for each of these areas. How do you organize your classroom? How are you creating a daily schedule? And how are you cueing transitions in a multisensory way? Okay, so a lot of times when I see, as a principal, when I would go into a classroom and if I was seeing quite a bit of disruption, if I was seeing a lot of student behavior issues, one of the things that I would look at is that what is the teacher doing to influence those particular student behaviors? And these are the 3 things that I always look at. So evidence-based practices for teacher behavior. So here are some things that you can do to make sure that your behavior in the classroom management plan is up to snuff. Make sure that you're maximizing the structure in your classroom. You're establishing the rules ahead of time and you're teaching those rules. You're modeling that appropriate behavior. You're actively engaging the students during instruction. You're using a variety of strategies to respond to appropriate behaviors, and you're using a variety of strategies to respond to inappropriate behaviors. Okay, so we've talked about the teacher behavior. Now we're going to be looking at the student's behavior. Most classroom management plans just focus on the student's behavior without considering the teacher's behavior. But remember, it takes 2 to tango. You will see in the template for the classroom management plan that both teacher and student behaviors are addressed. So when we talk about student behavior in the classroom, a majority of student behavior concerns are what we call surface behaviors. These are the run-of-the-mill disruptive behaviors that students engage in for a variety of reasons. When teachers know how to effectively address these surface behaviors in the moment, future negative consequences can be avoided. So, students' behavior, surface behavior. Every teacher has their bag of tricks that they use to address surface behavior in their classroom management plan. You refine your bag of tricks over time, and it just takes some time and experience. One of the best ways to pick up some tricks for your bag of tricks here is to observe a master teacher and what they're doing in the moment. You want to see kind of what tips or tricks they use. And here are some examples of some of the surface behavior bag of tricks. You can redirect in the moment. You can do planned ignoring, not just flat out ignoring, but kind of planned in the moment if you feel like it's very, very disruptive. but that's a tricky one. And observing a master teacher doing that is important. You can do signaling, kind of some silent signals to a student. Proximity, where if a student is misbehaving, you can walk towards them, maybe gently put your hand on their desk. You can do interest boosting. If they're being disruptive, you can call out and say, hey, I heard that you're really interested in X. That kind of redirects their behavior by getting them interested in what you're saying. Use of humor. This is a tricky one. Use it judiciously. You can hurdle leap. That's a trick that if one student is doing something and having one student kind of comment to what they're saying and having a student ask a question, that's a tricky one too. That takes a lot of experience. And then remove all the objects. So if a student is messing around with something in the classroom, gently removing it. I'm going to babysit your phone for a little bit, for example, or my goodness, that little thing that you're playing with over there or messing with, maybe I'll give that back to you at the end of the class. All right, so here we go. We're going to pull this all together and create your classroom management plan in the activity for this week. The classroom management plan activity has two parts. First of all, you're going to be creating your own statement of purpose. Then you're going to be completing what I call the 4 stages. Let's look at those here now. There are 4 stages in the classroom management plan. Stage 1 is planning out what you're going to be doing before meeting your class. Stage 2 is what you're going to do in that very first class, the very first encounter with your students. Stage 3 is what you're going to be doing that first week. And then stage 4 is what you anticipate you're going to be doing by way of ongoing strategies. You may not know what those specifically look like. They may change over time, but it's a good idea to at least put some thought into it right now. All right, so how to complete the 4 stages. For each stage, they're going to be planning questions / prompts over on the left-hand column to get you thinking about the what you will do. Your task is to come up with the product or how you will address each planning question or prompt. Some of the products may be similar in each stage, and that's completely okay. Just be sure to consider how the products may change over time as you progress through the school year. So for example, what you may do in the first day may be very different from what you're going to be doing for some of those ongoing strategies. All right, here we go. So you will be assigned a partner for this activity. You and your partner can brainstorm together on how to complete the template. This will be an opportunity to further develop your independent peer coaching and collaboration skills. These are skills that you're going to need as you progress through the SEED courses. Each student must complete their own classroom management plan. Once you're done with your classroom management plan, post it in your assigned thread with your partner. Then go on ahead and visit the other threads to see what your classmates' plans look like. All right, that's it for now. If you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch with me, either via text or through the Blackboard site. But preferably, as most of you know, I prefer my text. So let me know if you have any questions. All right, good luck.